in India, good afternoon in Cairo and Beirut. Uh, I am Ibrahim Awad. I'm a professor of practice in global affairs in the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the American University in Cairo. And I'm also the director of the Center for Migration and Refugee Studies of the school and the university. The dean of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, GAP, Ambassador Nabil Fahmy, would have very much liked to welcome you to this webinar. However, he has some technical problems at the moment. Could you please? So could you please? So he would have liked to welcome you to this webinar. Unfortunately, there are some technical problems. He cannot join us, but later, if these technical problems are solved, he will come in and say a few words. I would like to welcome the audience and the panelists for the first CMRS webinar on international migration in the Middle East in the aftermath of the pandemic and of the collapse in oil prices. For many years, CMRS has organized monthly seminars on current and conceptual migration and refugee issues. The lockdown and social distancing requirements have decided us to launch this new webinar series. At CMRS, we thought that it was only natural that we dedicate the first webinar to the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown on international migration in the region in the Middle East. This impact, the impact of the pandemic, was compounded by the collapse in oil prices. So in addition to immediate health considerations, such as threats of contagion and treatment needs, and an as yet undetermined number of international migrant workers have lost their jobs. The same migrant workers or others were stranded, neither employed at destination nor able to return to their countries of origin. Some, not having recouped the cost of their migration, faced an indebtedness specter upon return. Women domestic workers were particularly vulnerable. For countries of origin, the immediate and expected medium to long-term impact was and is considerable. This impact should be felt in the functioning of the labor markets, as well as in the balances of payment, most specifically in the balances on current account. For the sake of time, I would rather let the very distinguished panelists that CMRS is proud to host this afternoon. I will rather let them talk and analyze the issues raised for migrant workers and for their countries of origin. I will introduce the panelists briefly in the order of their first interventions. This will be reverse alphabetical order of the second names of our eminent panelists. Our first panelist will be Dr. Irudaya Rajan. Dr. Rajan is a professor at the Center for Development Studies, Kerala, India. He is chair of a NOMAD thematic group on international migration and urbanization managed by the World Bank, with over 3 decades of research experience. Since 1998, he has coordinated 8 major migration surveys in Kerala and other Indian states. He has published extensively in national and international journals, and is the editor of the annual series India Migration Report, as well as the editor-in-chief of the journal Migration and Development. Panelists. is Dr. Jean de Cunha, who is the UN Senior Global Advisor on International Migration, based in its regional office for Arab states in Cairo, Egypt. She holds a doctorate in sociology and has over 35 years of leadership, academic, and practitioner experience on gender equality and women's rights. She has served for 19 years in senior technical and management position within UNIFEM and UN Women in East and Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and the Arab region. And Dr. de Cunha has extensive research that was published in books and academic journals. Third panelist is Dr. Richard Cholivinsky, who is a senior migration specialist in the International Labour Organization's ILO Regional Office for Arab States, based in Beirut, Lebanon, where he oversees ILO's labour migration work in the Arab region. Having previously served at headquarters and previously at IOM, Richard is a lawyer by training with a long experience in academia and many publications on international labour migration, migrants, human and labour rights, European migration law and policy, and migration in international law. Our fourth, last but not least of the panelists is Dr. Dina Abdel Fattah, who is an assistant professor of economics at the American University in Cairo. She is a graduate of AUC and holds a doctorate of philosophy and an MSc in economics from the University of Sussex in England. She has broad professional experience as a labor economist and international migration scholar, also an expert on gender issues. Dr. Abdel Fattah has undertaken research and carried out consultancies on the economics of migration with different local, regional, and international organizations. The panelists will express their views and engage in a discussion, after which they will react to the questions raised and the comments made by the audience. We have already received a number of questions, and the audience is most welcome to send questions using the chat button at the bottom of your screens. To launch the debate, I will put one question to each of the panelists. It would be highly appreciated if they could kindly reply in 3 to 4 minutes each. So my question is, first, I will keep with their indulgence, I will keep from mentioning titles. So my first question is for Irudaya Rajan. Rajan, my friend, Indian labor migration, a good part of which originates in your state of Kerala, has been for many years the largest in the GCC countries. Has India witnessed a large volume of return migrants after the dual shocks of COVID-19 and the collapse of oil prices? And have Indian migrants and returnees met with problems, and with which problems would you like to emphasize?
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for the invitation and to be part of the very high-profile speakers along with me. I just want to, start saying that, throughout the world, we have close to 200 lakhs or 20 million Indians are still holding Indian passport, living anywhere in the world. And out of that, 10 million are in the Gulf, in 6 countries, what is called the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. So we have 6 countries accommodate close to 10 million Indians there. Now, if you look at that 10 million, probably Kerala has probably 25 lakhs or 2.5 million Keralites are in the Gulf. Because the Kerala people, 90% of the Kerala migrants are in the Gulf. Out of 10 people leave Kerala, 9 are in the Gulf. So it has a direct impact. In fact, sometimes we say that, something happens or somebody is coughing in Dubai, we get impact. That much the connection is very high between Kerala and the Gulf. Now, if you look at the Gulf crisis, it is not the first time that we are talking about return migration. We got the Gulf War some time back. You know that we had a Gulf War and there were people were transported. Then we got the global crisis. We had Nidakat, what you call them, the migration policies in the Gulf to promote the national people for jobs. So we have several periods we had return migration. But this time we are expecting a little more than what we had earlier period. So if you talk about 10 million people in the Gulf, we are expecting at least 10 to 15% of them will come back to India. Something like 10 to 15 lakhs. That is the some type of estimate based on the our understanding on the Kerala and the Indian Gulf migration. When we talk about 15 lakhs people who are coming back, 3 lakhs will come to Kerala. I think Kerala is started preparing to welcome them. We already reserved 200,000 beds for them to be quarantined, to be taken care of. So Kerala is, Kerala knows about the migration. I think it is not something like many other countries. Kerala knows the importance of migration. So even the Kerala Chief Minister is telling all the time, Pravasis are the lifeline for the Kerala economy. So we know that. So 3 lakhs people are likely to come. And then the remittances to Kerala will come down by 15%. That means Kerala is going to lose between 10,000 crores to 15,000 crores because of the COVID impact. Now, when you look at these 300,000 people who are going to come back to Kerala, we are dividing them into 3 categories for the benefit of the Kerala government and also the Indian government. At least 30% of the return migrants, what we call them is normal return migrants. If you go to Gulf, you have to return because it is not like going to America, you get the PR, you get, America, UK, or you go to Europe, you get what is called a blue card. When you go to Gulf, you only get the labor card, you come back. So people are coming back, not today, but they were coming for so many years. For example, Kerala, I went to Kerala, North Kerala, I have seen the grandfather was in the Gulf. Father was in the Gulf. Now son is in the Gulf. So you can see 3 generations of people are in the Gulf. So it's like a very long history of 50 plus years. In Kerala, pre-COVID, we got 15 lakhs return migrants. Pre-COVID. So, and we have 6 MLAs in the Kerala Assembly. So, politically, they are a very strong group, return migrants. So these people, we don't need to worry about them because they are coming with some money. They know that they are coming back. Another 1 lakh people, what we call them, I think this is something important for all the people to discuss is re-migration. Return migration is not the end of the story. That is only beginning of re-migration because I'm expecting at least 1 lakh Keralites will go back to some country, may not be Gulf. They will go to other countries because COVID-19 is going to open up new corridors, new sectors, new countries. So, you don't need to think that the COVID is going to end to migration. I think it is going to basically create more migration. I don't think it is going to stop. The third type of people, what we are talking about, forced return migrants. They are forced to come because of the COVID. They have not made money. They have not even made money to pay their recruitment cost, what they spend to go to Gulf. I think these people will be in a deep trouble. And we are talking to the Kerala government to provide them what is called them free air tickets, give them some money to start some employment. So we are talking about these 1 lakh people, what we talk about rehabilitation and related issues. And before I conclude, I would like to say one more thing is that when we talk about re-migration, we have to provide them skills. And India has a big program called Skill India. So we are working with the Indian government so that they can be reskilled and then they can go back. And this is something very important for many countries because Gulf is not going to close. Even 25 lakhs Keralites who are in the Gulf, all of them want to come back. It will take at least 20 years. So the Gulf migration to Kerala will continue for at least 20 years because it's like a network. And they are not going to come back because another problem is that India is not doing well in economics. So we need to worry about that. Now, what you are seeing who are coming is a panic return migration. Panic. And there is no flight even today to come from Gulf to India. Only Vande Bharat special flights. That means whoever come now, it is only trial for the movie. It's like a teaser. When the movie comes after 3 months, but you see the teaser for 3 months. This is the teaser we are seeing. The real return will happen in September to December. I'll stop here and we can get back more a little later. Thank you very much, Dr. Abraham.
Thank you very much. And I hope our panelists will keep in mind what Rajan had just said for the second series of questions. But my first question to Jean DeCornia is about women migrant workers. In the Middle East, women migrant workers are concentrated in domestic works, and in domestic work, they don't benefit from the protections that are available in labor laws, and their vulnerabilities have been augmented by the dual shock. So can you identify for us the most important of these added vulnerabilities, and can you give us an idea about what UN Women did to assist these women migrant workers?
Thank you very much, Dr. Awad, for having us on this panel. I would like to say that women domestic workers or women migrant workers constitute about 32.8% of 38 million migrants and refugees in the Arab states. And women domestic workers are about 44% of the 77 million domestic workers, and 62% of the total female migrant employment in GCC countries. And there are large numbers of undocumented workers, and so this is an underestimation, we know. Now, demand for domestic workers has basically been quite resilient to previous crises, the financial crisis and the past and the current oil shocks. But the COVID crisis has really been a crisis of humanity, so to speak, and it has laid bare the flaws in our societal fabric and ethic, which largely, I think, lives off discrimination based on age, on nationality, on race, on immigration and economic status, on gender, including women's very poorly recognized, protected, unpaid, underpaid roles, particularly in the care sector, which has been at the front lines of this response, and unpaid care workers or paid care workers who are really providing for the sustenance of economies, families, societies, and keeping the wheels of society moving. Domestic workers are very much a part of this care sector, and this crisis has impacted them slightly differently from other crises. And what are these impacts that they are feeling? Number one, in the context of COVID-related panic, we are seeing heightened xenophobia and an abuse of domestic workers, particularly part-time live-out workers who are being terminated from service because they're construed as transmitters of the virus and unhygienic, dirty, for instance. Their undocumented status leaves them with no incomes, and so they have no access to food, to rents. They're thrown out of their homes. They are stranded. Borders are shut. They have no access to COVID information, to hygiene products, to services. They are susceptible to debt. They are susceptible to being identified, arrested, detained, deported. Documented workers also have their contracts terminated and without compensation very often because employers have panicked or they have no money to pay, their resources are dwindling. And many of them have actually been sent back to their countries even before their contracts have run the normal period of its length or tenure when airports had not been shut. They have difficulties in repeating their monies, long working hours, long working days, greater workloads, stress levels increasing, abuse, because families are all at home, schools have closed, families are in panic or anxiety or stress, or they're over-obsessed with cleanliness. They lack access to personal protective equipment, to healthcare services. Very often, they are constrained from actually contacting family members because they're prevented from using internet services at home. Or for instance, healthcare services, documented and undocumented workers find problems in accessing these services. And though our governments in this region some of them have provided free testing and free services, it's not very clear how this will pan out for undocumented workers. And we have anecdotes about undocumented women migrant workers, domestic workers being turned away. Apart from that, they live in particularly undocumented live-out workers in crowded apartments, or they're in detention centers and shelters awaiting deportation to their countries or return to their countries, and are at risk of contracting the virus because these conditions, the environments here, are not very safe and secure, and they're not provided basic amenities, hygiene products, water, sanitation, food, and the like. So these are some of the problems and that are being faced. What has UN Women done?
Can you please summarize, because we still have second and third rounds of questions.
Okay, so to summarize what I've said, I think some of the pre-existing vulnerabilities and lack of protections in labor laws and in migration policy have actually been exacerbated for migrant workers in the COVID situation. And as I said, you know, when their contracts are terminated, they've just turned undocumented and they've had to leave. And so this is the way it's affected them. Their families and their communities will, you know, suffer income losses and the like. So I want to just conclude by saying it's very important. We're seeing that fiscal policies or fiscal packages have not really addressed migrant workers and women migrant workers in a big way. And despite balance of payment situations and, you know, being going askew and fiscal space shrinking in some of our countries of origin, I think there needs to be more fiscal spending and less austerity measures, because that is going to impact women badly. And that will spending will inject money into the economy. So more fiscal space needs to be created, and, you know, packages for migrant workers need to be enhanced.
Thank you so much. We'll get back to you with more questions. Now, our third panelist is Richard Solivinsky. Richard, some of the issues just mentioned by some of the challenges just mentioned by Jean de Cunha, I think are very close to your concerns at the ILO. So the protection of workers employed in countries other than their own, in fact, is one of the objectives of the International Labour Organization, and it's provided in its constitution. So which protections have migrant workers in the Middle East necessitated as a result of the dual shocks, protections against some of the challenges that we have just heard Jean de Cunha refer to, and what did the ILO, the International Labour Office, do to support and assist these workers?
Okay, thank you very much, Ibrahim, and for the invitation to the seminar. Let me say first that, you know, clearly on the positive side, that there have been, you know, in terms of protections for migrant workers, the announcements that everyone has access to health, regardless of status, and particularly when it comes to COVID-19 testing and treatment. Although, you know, I take the point, as Jean de Cunha was saying, that there are question marks to what extent this access is really open to those in irregular status, and that they, and what reassurances are given that they will not be subject to arrest or deportation. There have also been, during lockdowns, the extension of work and residence permits or automatic extensions, so workers don't fall into irregular status. Some possibility in some GCC countries for workers to find alternative employment. So there have been some positive responses. Otherwise, as Jean de Cunha mentioned as well, the crisis has effectively exacerbated or magnified many of the challenges of labor migration governance that were already there in the region in structural terms. So the operation of the sponsorship system, the low wages received by low-income migrants, very limited social protection, which has indeed resulted in those that have lost their jobs falling into a dire economic situation, particularly with the travel restrictions in place, and also the lack of workers' voice in the region. And that continues to be a structural issue. So clearly, many of these problems are not new, that they've been there before. And as we've seen, as Jean also mentioned, in relation to worker accommodation, a large number of migrant workers, in fact, in many GCC countries, the majority of people that have been infected by COVID-19, the majority of infections has been amongst migrant workers. So that's a very brief overview of the issues, and obviously one can go into a lot more detail. In terms of what the ILO is doing to try address some of this situation, well, first of all, we are engaging in a lot of advocacy to ensure that migrants, migrant workers in particular, are included in many of the COVID-19 responses. And this is a particular challenge, or has been, in countries like Lebanon and Jordan, where the focus on so-called vulnerable groups goes very much to the refugee population, whereas there are also significant migrant worker populations in both of these two countries. Another issue of particular concern is that while rightly so, the focus has been on the humanitarian situation of many of these workers, particularly those who have lost their jobs and are stranded in the destination countries, to ensure that they do not give up on their labor rights entitlements. You know, as Rajan was saying, if indeed 10 to 15% of all Indian migrant workers return to India, and that, of course, given the global figure, these are huge numbers, and many of them a return of unpaid wages or their end of service benefits that they're entitled to according to their contract are not paid. This is a huge amount. This runs into essentially billions of dollars. And, you know, I know that this is a particular concern, not only for the ILO, but of many of those advocating for migrant worker rights in civil society and elsewhere. So that is a significant concern. And clearly, there are still a lot of data gaps, and our ILO is trying to support a number of rapid assessments in Kuwait, in Bahrain. We've also been involved in some work in this regard in Lebanon. And some of this preliminary data is indeed showing us what I've already said, that, for example, we did a very quick rapid assessment together with the WHO, IOM, and UNICEF on a group of quarantined Bangladeshi migrant workers in Lebanon. Some of the questions that we asked related to labor issues, and we found, like I've already said, that some of these structural issues are still very much present. For example, the number of workers who had their passports held by their employers, those that weren't getting fully their wages. Also, those who are in quarantine who are entitled under the labor law to sick leave, not being sure whether the employer would pay that. These are issues that have been, as I said, magnified by COVID-19, but were already there structurally, and that we're already working on. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you so much. Let me now turn to Dr. Dina Abdel-Fattah. Dina, the last two interventions by Jean DeCunha and Richard were really about protection, essentially. Rajan started with an overall view on the importance of labor migration, especially to Kerala and its place in Kerala society. Now let's turn to the economics of labor migration. For almost 50 years now, labor migration has relieved pressures on the Egyptian labor market, reducing unemployment, and it has been at the origin of financial remittances. Last year, remittances to Egypt Egypt was the 5th country receiving remittances in the world in 2019. It received 27 billion US dollars, amounting to some 9% of Egypt's GDP. Do you have estimates? Do we have estimates of returnees to Egypt up until now as a result of the dual shock? And what consequences for labor migration do we expect the dual shock will produce, especially what consequences the collapse of oil prices will produce for labor migration? Rajan said that migration will continue anyway, that we've had crisis before, and this is one more crisis. It is more severe crisis, but migration will continue. What do you think? What information can you share with us, and what analysis that you have that you can share with us?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim, for inviting me to this very interesting talk and to work with the distinguished panelists. Actually, I'll try to, as much as possible, tackle the many questions that were raised in as little time as possible.
Yeah, because we have a second round. We have a second round.
Yes. So I'll actually start with a comment on what Rajan said, and actually being jealous myself of not being able to share such numbers with such confidence when it comes to Egyptian migrants. So we are already having difficulty getting count or proper count of Egyptians who are living abroad. And we're struggling with this count at the collective level and actually aggregating them by what kind of jobs they're doing, education, gender, age groups, and so on. So already we do not have a strong figure, but we have an estimate that we do have around 5 million Egyptians who are living abroad. With respect to the return, so this makes it even more difficult to give an estimate of how many people have actually returned. However, all of the discussion and the analysis that is currently going on is comparing the current situation to the situation that happened during the Gulf War. And it has resulted to the return of approximately 1 million Egyptian pounds. 1 million Egyptians during this time. So if we do expect the return of 1 million Egyptians during this pandemic, then we are talking about another supply shock to the Egyptian labor market. So the Egyptian labor market by itself is facing its own demand shock. So we are seeing a problem with the demand for labor within the current situation of the economy. And now we're facing another kind of supply shock where Egyptians are returning from the Gulf and adding to the strains of the Egyptian labor market. So if expectations of the return of 1 million is actually confirmed, then we do expect that unemployment rates that were estimated to be around an average of 8.5% by the fourth quarter of 2019 to actually jump up somewhere between 11 to 16%, depending on how much we exactly get. The difficulty is actually with knowing who's coming back. So for the first time, the ministry is actually working through a committee on trying to know and record the Egyptians who are coming back and trying to understand what skills do they have, what skills do they own. So reflecting on what Rajan was saying earlier, it's actually preparing them either to integrate back into the Egyptian economy, and they've mainly highlighted the role of SMEs in trying to absorb these returnees, or to be at the forefront whenever the Gulf economies start operating again. So these Egyptians already have the expertise, already have the skills, and already have the knowledge of working in the Gulf. So they are at the forefront whenever this fierce competition starts again with the reopening of the Gulf countries. Egyptians are there at the forefront of it and are able to fill this demand or address this demand when it comes again. The other side of the story is actually coming in with remittances. So as you mentioned, Dr. Ibrahim, Egypt has been receiving, or has been the 5th recipient of remittances during this last year with a value of $27 billion. And it's one of the highest values that Egypt has ever received in its history. So we are risking already the slowdown or the reduction of these remittances. To an already slowing down economy, this is going to hurt not only at the macro level and the foreign currencies, but actually the household recipients of the remittances themselves. So the main use of remittances among Egyptian households with migrants is mainly consumption. So we do expect and we do see another downfall on the consumption patterns of Egyptians, which is going to, in its own, generate another round of economic pressures on demand, labor being a derived demands. We're expecting to see another round of contraction on local labor when it comes to that. So I'll stop here and then keep the other details to the second round of questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dina. I'll go back to Rajan. What do you think of the analysis that Dina has just made? Because India was the first recipient of remittances last year with some 80 billion. But of course, in India, it's less than 3% of GDP, which is a very important difference. But how much do remittances represent in Kerala's GDP, Rajan? And as a result, what do you expect as consequences for the labor market in Kerala and for the finances of Kerala?
No, I think
India at large, of course, not only Kerala, and India at large.
No, I think you are right that India was #1, but even they were received $84 billion. World Bank has predicted 26% decline in the current year. World Bank has predicted, but I told World Bank no, maybe only 15%, because I don't think, because World Bank went wrong several times, including the global crisis time. They said there will be a lot of decline in remittances to India, but very little decline. This time we may expect some decline. But Kerala, the remittances are equivalent to 35% of the GDP. That's probably the highest in the world, because Kerala is not India, any country. It's a small state. Because that's why I was telling to Dilip sometime back. Nobody put Kerala. Everybody put India and then 3 points Nepal, Sri Lanka. But Kerala was not put. If you put Kerala, then maybe we are #1. So Kerala is heavily dominated. We call them remittances-based economy. So remittance is not coming. It's going to create a lot of problem, including returned migrant suicides. Returned migrant suicide, because we have seen it in 2008. I think this is going to happen. So there will be Kerala. There will be a little depression will come. But the point is that Kerala people have seen in 2018 floods. We had a big crisis in Kerala, which no other state in India had. We had a huge floods. So Kerala had managed floods. Kerala had managed the Nipah virus. So for us, COVID is maybe like another virus. We are reasonably doing well in COVID also. Kerala is being talked about by everybody. So there will be an impact on the economy and the society. And also Kerala has a huge internal migrants from other states, because I call them, Keralites are 25 lakhs. Keralites are in the other countries. And we have 25 lakhs or 2.5 million other state people are in Kerala. So we call them replacement migration. Kerala plumber is in Dubai. We are getting plumber from Orissa. We are getting electrician from Uttar Pradesh. So we are, it's like it's a very big economy. But the point is that Kerala government is taking a lead in setting up what is called the return migrant rehabilitation program. I think this is something very, very important. However, in India, not even a single word. When the Prime Minister of India announced 20 lakh crore for self-reliant economy, and 5 days Finance Minister spoke, they talk about only internal migrant. Not even a single word told by the government of India on return migrant. They have not even a single word. I was telling in some of the press, many political parties in this country, in India, they were all collecting money from diasporas for the elections. But now they are in crisis. You are not even talking about them. I think that is where we have to put the migrants into the policy front. Migrants has to be part of even your revival package, which is not there. But the Kerala government has already put package. Kerala government started paying money to the stranded migrants who came in February. They could not go back in March. They were giving them something like 5,000 rupees. And Kerala was taking lead. So Kerala knows this. So I think that is one thing we are talking about. The second point, before I go to the next point, oil crisis. I don't think we should read it very seriously, because oil crisis is, I was telling to my own country, today nobody, I have not put petrol for my car for last 2 months. I am not moving. Nobody is moving. Most of the flights throughout the world is parked in the airport. In India itself, 1,000 flights are parked. When travel started moving, there will be a demand for oil. So by January, the oil price probably doubled. So I think the oil crisis, I don't read too much. It will push to the migration, because I have seen oil prices have gone up to 120 barrels. So oil price is something, I don't think it is going to create a large return migration. But one thing I agree with our friend from ILO, Professor Richard, people don't want to come back now. I talked to many people from the Gulf already. They were telling we are not going to come because we have not received our salary. If you leave now, I am going to lose my salaries. So people are not going to come. Even they come to India, India has already a job crisis. India, even pre-COVID, India has the highest unemployment. So what they will do when they're coming here? So they will try to, move around there. They will try to reduce their salaries. Maybe the age level might come down. But I think large scale return migration, or what we call them exodus. Exodus is not going to happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Again, you have presented us with a contrasted picture. The problem that might arise for returnees, the social problems that might arise, the problems for the internal migrants in India, and you have established a link between internal migration and international migration. Of course, everyone is talking about internal migration in India. At present, you refer to policies, and again, you are optimistic as to the future of migration. So, Jean de Cunha, for Rajan, there will be demand will pick up again. Demand will pick up again after demand for oil picks up, because of course we know that demand for labor is a derived demand. So there will be demand for oil, there will be economic growth, and therefore there will be demand for labor, including for domestic workers. But as you said, and as Richard said, there are structural problems with domestic work. Can this crisis be an opportunity to revisit the conditions under which women domestic workers are employed in the Middle East? And what can you provide as policy advice to countries of origin as an alternative to these women migrating, or as support to their families left back home?
Yes, I think every crisis is an opportunity to build back better. And while I do believe that workers will be staying on in irregular conditions in these countries, as Professor Rajan said, certain things need to be structurally addressed as well. And for countries of origin, I think in terms of women migrant workers or migrant workers, there is definitely need to put in place or to invest. I think it's all about creating in the immediate and in the long term, investing in development and employment-led growth in countries of origin. So creating jobs for women and decent jobs for women, so that they are given the choice not to migrate. And if they do migrate, then there must be pre-departure training programs for them, which actually speak to safety and to protection of their rights at all stages of migration. There must be restrictions and regulations for recruitment agencies. And now many of the Gulf countries are also introducing, including for domestic workers, e-recruitment programs. There has to be skills upgrading. And ILO is very involved in that, but certain of the Gulf countries are also looking at skills competencies and job descriptions for certain occupational categories, and online recruitment of domestic workers, including domestic workers on a nascent scale, but looking at recruitment, online recruitment, which will be more transparent to cut off some of the recruiting agencies. These are public-private partnerships. So those are some of the things that are being done. I think it's extremely important that the sponsorship system is reformed in terms of the structural issues to be addressed, and that women migrant workers and all migrant workers should be employed, should not require an individual sponsor, but must have employment-based visas, that they must be able to give adequate notice to their employers, and if they want to leave, and be able to contract other jobs in the labor market. So labor market flexibility, there needs to be certain bridging visas given to them to actually find new jobs. Exit permissions, must be abolished. Labor protections, I think and there are some interesting changes that are being made, where I think it has to move to the ministries of labor and protections for domestic workers. Domestic workers really need to be full-time included in labor laws, and they must have, adequate wages, minimum wages, rights, rest days, sick leave, and all the benefits that come to other workers, as well as the right for collective bargaining and organizing. So these are issues that need to be addressed, which are taking shape or being introduced, but need to be consolidated and taken forward. And in terms of demand for domestic workers, I think that demand in the long run is going to go up after a bit, because when we're talking about the future of work and what sectors are going to grow, particularly the world over, but also in this region, care work is going to be a sector that will grow, and different tiers of the care work would open up opportunities to nationals, but there would be elements that could be opened up also to migrant workers, given the realities of the region in terms of demographics, in terms of more women's participation, in terms of culture. Because in this region, like in India, people don't want to have their elderly or their children in creches or old age institutions. They do want home-based care. So I think these factors would raise the demand in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Richard, you have just heard Jean de Cunha refer to the sponsorship system, to the legal framework for employment in the large labor markets that the GCC countries constitute, and the GCC countries represent a very important outlet for an oversupply of labor in many countries, including Egypt, India, the Philippines, and others. So this is a contribution also of the GCC countries. However, there are observations with regard to the sponsorship system, with regard to protection, to the legal framework in general. What can you say about that? Since you are at the ILO, this is the organization really with a mandate over conditions of work that has followed on the on conditions of recruitment, of employment, of living conditions. What can you tell us? What is new really with regard to the sponsorship system and the legal framework in general?
Thank you, Ibrahim. I think if we compare to the position, let's say about 10 years ago, what is new, I think, is certainly the realization in most of these countries, the GCC and elsewhere, that the way the kafala sponsorship system operates is problematic. And that has led to a number of policy reforms across the region to try and address some of the most exploitative elements of the system, such as, Jean de Cunha referred to the exit permits. They've now been abolished in most of the GCC countries. but that's just one aspect. There are other aspects of the sponsorship system, like the restrictions on being able to change one's employer, the ability to terminate a contract with just giving notice. What happens if you leave your employer and you fall into a situation of irregularity and the complications relating to the irregular status that severely disadvantages migrant workers. So there are these elements that still, in my view, need to be worked on. That there has been progress. Often the progress is there on paper, but there are still challenges with regard to enforcement. So in some countries, for example, there's now a clear prohibition on employers, legal prohibition on employers holding the passports or the identity documents of workers, but the practice remains that the documents are withheld. And I gave some examples from this small rapid assessment that was done in Lebanon with regard to this particular group of Bangladeshi quarantine workers, where they were still suffering from many of these structural issues. So there has been quite a lot of progress, and as I'm sure you and others are aware, in Qatar, the ILO has a significant program with the government, and the government has pledged to abolish the sponsorship system, and a number of legal reforms have already been in place. But of course, the challenges lie in actually adequately enforcing some of these reforms. So, you know, I think I can be somewhat optimistic in that regard. But it continues to be quite a slow process. And I just wanted to add, Ibrahim, because there was a question for me in the chat regarding whether the ILO has done a study on states on the demographic profile of returnees. And the answer is not yet. This is important. I think it's important for our discussion because the demographic profile is obviously very different, not only in terms of age or sex, but also in skill level, and to what extent indeed these migrants will be able to return once the demand increases. And I say that with a question at the back of my head, because in some GCC countries, of course, and I'm thinking, for example, with regard to Kuwait, but also others that want to reduce the dependency on migrant workers. And here we're really talking more about the skilled workforce, and to have more jobs for Kuwaitis or other GCC nationals in those more skilled sectors, and to what extent this crisis will be used as I guess an opportunity to sort of fast track some of the nationalization policies that have always been very much at the center of discussion. So that's, you know, a question I'm actually asking back to you, but I think this is something that needs to be considered, because we know, of course, that in terms of returns, we can guess, right? I mean, with regard to Ethiopians, for example, the vast majority of Ethiopian workers in the Middle East are migrant domestic workers. So we can guess what their profile is, even though some of them may be actually quite skilled before they've left Ethiopia or other African countries. But in terms of the other migrant worker populations, those profiles will be more diverse, I think, particularly when it comes to Indian nationals, of course, and others.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard. You have given us some encouraging news. There is change that is being introduced in the legal framework in the kafala system, and this is encouraging, even if there is quite a few measures that have yet to be taken. Dina Abdel Fattah, Rajan, in the first intervention, referred to new corridors that will open, that there will be new labor markets, or probably the same labor markets, but with larger demand for migrant workers. Jean de Cunha mentioned new jobs, the care sector. These are outlets for a country whose labor force is growing at high rates, such as Egypt. So what do you think that labor migration will undergo as changes? Can we expect changes in the job skill composition of Egyptian labor migration, of destination of Egyptian labor migration? Will it be more diversified? Because of course we have also heard Rajan and Jean refer to demand that will pick up again in the Gulf. This is not the end of the story of oil produced demand for labor. So how can you combine external employment of migrant workers and internal employment in the future?
Okay, so we already know that labor market or the demand and supply in the labor market are very much reacting to the changes in demographic structures of countries. And we've already seen a change in the demographic structure of Europe long before the crisis, or long before the pandemic. So now with the crisis happening, or with the pandemic happening, we see the dependence of Europe on migrant workers appearing in many sectors. Among them is the agriculture seasonal workers, and among them are the migrant workers in the care sector. So in addition to the market, the expectation of the reopening up of the Gulf countries, where we do not really expect to see a change in the skill demand with regards to the Gulf countries, and therefore the same population or the same labor population from the Egyptian market would be addressing this demand. But we do expect to see a reformulation to the demand of skills coming from the European countries. So we do expect to see a demand for migrant workers with a whole range of skills originating at the European labor markets. And with this identification of skills, it's actually addressing what needs to be done at the national level, which we repeatedly discussed, many of us here, which is identifying what skills do we own. So to be able to address any skill demand at any international labor market, or even at the national labor market itself, we need to go through an identification of skills. So this identification of skills is not only falling behind at the return migrants end, but also at the national labor market or the national labor force itself. So we do have, Egypt is going through a young population. So the majority of the population is young. And at the same time, the majority of the unemployment is still among this young population, and actually the educated of them. So this is where unemployment is really concentrated within the Egyptian labor market. So we do expect the return migrants are actually adding to this pool of unemployment. So if we are able to integrate them in the labor market, it's going to be a bit problematic identifying what skills do they own and how to match them with an already labor market that is still trying to, since 2011, is still trying to go back to its solid nature, which is still falling behind with that. So the reintegration of these return migrants still has its own question marks on it. So this is why they are changing the dialogue to trying to look at the role of SMEs and entrepreneurship in reintegrating those return migrants. But again, this depends on what kind of jobs, what skills do they own that allows them to become entrepreneurs. So the future is actually looking at identifying what skills do we own. So now the whole world is moving to the demand and supply of skills. So what skills do we own? What skills is being demanded at the international labor markets, so we can enhance our potential migrants or our potential laborers with those skills in demand to be able to be at the upfront for this demand when it really originates or when it really starts to happen.
Thank you very much, Dina. Thank you so much. it's 1 minute before 4 o'clock, so we'll extend for 10 minutes. I will give each of the panelists 2 minutes for a final intervention, and I will put a question. I have a question which I've had for a long time. In fact, I want to put it to Rajan. In the light of what Dina said about skills and about linking skills to labor markets, external labor markets, I have always wondered, Kerala has very high human development indicators, very developed and very educated labor force, but it is still dependent on labor migration. So very high human development indicators, but the economy of Kerala cannot really, does not absorb this highly developed labor force. So what do you expect? How can you explain this in less than 2 minutes? And in the rest of the 2 minutes, what do you expect that the impact of return and of the drop in remittances representing 35% of GDP in Kerala, what do you expect this will happen? In 2 minutes, I know it's a challenge, but it's 2 minutes. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, you know, this high skilled, I think Kerala had high skilled not just today, it had high skilled the last 40, 50 years. That's why Kerala started sending people within the country. In 60s, it is called money order economy. Money will be transferred through money order, now it is called remittance economy. So Kerala has very high economic development, but very poor industrial development. We are not generating employment, we are generating skills, and we are surveying by that for last 50 years, and we will survive more. I don't see any problem with that. The second point I want to make is return migration should be part of the policy. I think COVID is teaching a lesson for all the countries of origin. Yeah, then they talk about sending and money. They will come back. I think the coming back, no return, second coming. No, we talk about second coming. You know, I think the return migration should be part of the policy. For example, India's migration bill, which is going to come up, not even a single word about return migration. I was telling the government, what are you talking about? It's a migration cycle. You go, work, earn money, come back. The coming back, why you are not talking about that? I think COVID has given a great opportunity for the policymakers to talk about, return migration. And finally, the last thing, in the short run, I'm telling to everyone, in the short run, migrants will suffer. But in the long run, migrant will win. And the long run will be 2021. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Again, I very much appreciate your optimism. This is extremely important. I think when it comes to analysis, we should be balanced, not overly pessimistic, not overly optimistic, but to have a realistic perspective on things. And I think this panel provides this balanced perspective. Jean de Cunha, Rajan has just referred to policy. There should be policy. Migration is not in itself, it's neither good, neither bad, neither. So policy should be. What policy support do you provide, or what policy support can you provide in the light of this experience of the dual shock? You also have 2 minutes.
Yes, I already spoke to the pre-departure, the departure and in sending countries, but I think when it comes to return migration, there must be gender-sensitive policies, targeted policies for women that provide integration, looking at what skills they have, looking at job markets, providing integration into labor markets, number one. There needs to be services for psychosocial support, legal aid services, also, at the countries of origin to get back wages and other things that have probably not been paid. Women who have been left behind, husbands who have moved, women who have been left behind need support, economic support, psychosocial support, children need support, children of parents who have migrated. So there needs to be a good solid reintegration package for migrant workers. But I will take 5 seconds to actually talk about what UN Women has done very briefly, because I didn't do that. we've run consultations, we've undertaken research, we've had webinars with groups on the impacts of COVID on women migrant workers, and some of the recommendations that have come up from women migrant workers and their support groups have fed into policy recommendations that we are using for support for policy reform with government in the areas of work, in the areas of social protection for migrants, and in the areas of immigration status. And lastly, I want to say that UN Women has actually in the Arab states, and this is around the world, but in the Arab states, UN Women has facilitated a 45 organization civil society network of women's organizations, but migrant workers, women with disabilities, women from conflict situations are included in those networks to talk about their COVID priorities and advocate with governments for response. But we're also getting together donors and other international organizations to back these demands with money, because that's where commitment really is then. And what is very important is that these are the most excluded groups of women that are being linked with the mainstream women's organizations. And that is extremely important because it leads to collaboration, partnership, and amplified impact, so to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Richard, policy, you are a senior specialist in the Arab region, and you provide support to the tripartite constituents of the ILO. So what is new as support measures that you have advocated in the aftermath of this dual shock? Unmute yourself, Richard.
Yes, my apologies. Thank you, Ibrahim. I'm not sure whether there's anything entirely new. As you know, ILO is a standards-based organization, so it adopts minimum standards for all workers worldwide. And we know that when it comes to the acceptance of those standards, particularly in this region, the picture is a little bit fragmented. Although many countries have accepted, the basic fundamental conventions of the ILO, which deal with, including in this region, which deal with areas such as non-discrimination, forced labor, child labor, as well as, the right to organize and collective bargaining. So we do have this framework of minimum standards to work with when we talk about policy reform. Another new, and this is a new area, obviously, and we have not mentioned it as yet, but of course, at the end of 2018, the Global Compact for Migration was adopted. This non-binding policy document, which deals with, all aspects, all dimensions of migration, the so-called 360-degree approach to migration, which means that all aspects of migration have to be sort of addressed in policy making. And as Rajan was referring to, this also means policies around return. And what's important, I think, when it comes to the Arab states region is that the large majority of countries voted in favor of this compact. So this is an instrument, even though it's non-binding, that it is important to consider in the context of addressing also migrant worker issues, because there are a lot of labor migration objectives in the compact that are relevant, but also in policy discussions going forward. It remains relevant despite the COVID-19 health emergency. So that's, if you like, a new tool on the block that we also have to look at, in addition to the other policy tools at our disposal in the discussions that we have. Another important area, and just let me say this briefly because I've seen this in the chat box, is the need when it comes to return, to ensure strong collaboration and cooperation between the destination and the origin countries, because there we've seen certainly recently quite a bit of fragmentation in respect of that cooperation. We've seen migrant workers returning. There have been no real proper, I would say, protocols, health protocols for their return. So we've seen infected workers returning. This has been an issue for some of the origin countries. The whole issue around quarantine upon return, who pays for return. I mean, many of these issues, in addition to the standards that we have, can be addressed through good cooperation between, you know, the origin and destination countries, as well as other relevant actors like the tripartite constituents you mentioned, the ILO tripartite constituents, but also civil society organizations.
Thank you so much, Richard. The last intervention will be by Dina Abdel Fattah. Richard has just said that there is really nothing new as policy advice. Rajan has also said that there is really nothing new under the sun, that crises have been there. It's not the first time. So I guess return migration that has been mentioned by all panelists is nothing new either in Egypt, and the problems that return migration is the policy problem for many countries. In fact, not only Egypt, for most countries of origin, return policy is wanting. Let's put it this way. So how what do you advocate really? What should be done? This is an alarm call. What can you advocate as a return policy from a labor market perspective, and what measures do you advocate both internally and externally in external labor markets? 2 minutes also, Dina, please.
Okay. Actually, before thinking of a return policy in Egypt, the thought is actually of a comprehensive policy framework that manages migration to start with. So the whole process, we do have some struggle in defining the key policy framework when it comes to migration. So at least from the government perspective, we have a separate ministry, and then we move to the ministry moves to a sector affiliated to the Ministry of Manpower, and then they split into ministries again, and so on, with the coordination between the different ministries actually leading up to this situation of the lack of a comprehensive policy framework. So as you said, Dr. Ibrahim, this is not the first time that we in Egypt see this large flow of return migrants. So we saw it with the Gulf War. We saw it again with the problems in Libya, starting in Libya in 2011, 2012. We see it at different points in time. It's usually a reflection of politically, socially, and economically what's happening at destination countries where Egyptians are mainly located. So thinking of a return policy, for example, the situation of Egyptians in Jordan has been something that was highlighted on in this current situation, where for the first time, when banks opened up, it was the first time that we see reverse remittances. So we see the Egyptians who are in Jordan, because they're suffering with the loss of income and with the layoffs and so on, they're asking their families in Egypt to send them back money, because with the airports closed, they were not even able to come back during this time. So what we really need to see with regards to policy, and I will also touch on a point that was raised in the chat, which is the brain drain. So we always look at a migration from a brain drain perspective, but there's also another perspective, which is a brain waste, which is what could these people have done, or what their situation could have been had they stayed in the Egyptian labor market. Would they be really contributing that much to the Egyptian labor market that we consider their migration really a brain drain? So the whole conversation has to be focused on what is it that we are looking for with the migration of Egyptians. Are we only looking for relieving the pressures on the labor market? Are we looking for the remittances? Are we looking for the entrepreneurial activities that we expect with the return of migrants? So all of this should actually identifying the main cause, or our main vision with regards to migration is actually going to dictate what the policies entail, or what kind of policies we really are looking for the management of migration. So we're not looking for encouraging versus stopping migration. It's actually having migration done in the organized manner that brings on the benefits for everyone.
Thank you so much, Dina. We have kept you for 12, 14, a quarter of an hour longer than the scheduled hour. I would like to thank you all. Thank all the panelists and all the participants, all the attendees. I think that we have had a comprehensive review of situation, a very balanced review between protection and economics. There has been an emphasis on the fact that crises are not new, crises are recurrent, that migration will not vanish, it will not disappear, migration will continue. But there has also been an emphasis on the need for policy and a comprehensive policy framework. As Dina said at the end, it's not only about return policy measures, it's about also recruitment, it's about exploring possibilities in labor markets and in new labor markets. It's about protection, as Jean de Cunha mentioned, as Richard also said to us. So there is a need for countries of origin to have comprehensive policy frameworks to make the best out of labor migration and to protect their migrant workers. And this is to the benefit of countries of destination, because they would also know what to expect. Countries of destination contribute through the jobs that they offer to migrant workers. They are expected to improve in their labor migration, immigration in this case policy, or external employment policies. So all of this, I think, has been addressed, and we would like to emphasize it. And my last point is that Dina and Jean de Cunha mentioned new corridor, new jobs, and referred to Europe. In fact, Egypt is at the center of the linkage between Gulf and Europe, and our next webinar will be on migration in the Euro-Mediterranean space. I'd like to thank my 4 panelists. Thank you very much, Rajan. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Dina. And my highest appreciation to the participants who have attended and who have sent us questions. And this webinar will be uploaded on CMRS website, and we look forward to hosting you in the next webinar in a couple of weeks. Good afternoon and good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.